Behavioral Neuroscience, Chapter 4, Segment 3. Receptor antagonists bind directly to postsynaptic receptors and block them from being activated by their neurotransmitters. An example is that Curare blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptors found on muscles, and this results in immediate paralysis. Selective receptor antagonists bind to specific receptors and activate them by mimicking neurotransmitters. An example is that LSD stimulates a subtype of serotonin receptor and produces bizarre visual experiences. Drugs can stimulate changes in the postsynaptic cell, such as upregulation or downregulation of receptor density, or by directly altering second messenger systems. Antipsychotics are a class of drugs that alleviate the symptoms of schizophrenia. Typical antipsychotics are a class of anti-schizophrenic drugs whose principal mode of action is antagonism of dopamine D2 receptors. It targets positive symptoms of schizophrenia. Atypical antipsychotics are a class of anti-schizophrenic drugs that have actions other than or in addition to the dopamine D2 receptor antagonism that characterizes the typical antipsychotics. This targets negative symptoms of schizophrenia. Antidepressants are a class of drugs that relieve symptoms of depression. The first generation of these drugs were MAO inhibitors, which break down monoamine neurotransmitters at axon terminals, reducing transmitter activity. This allows the monoamine neurotransmitters to accumulate at the synapse. Tricyclic antidepressants are a class of drugs that act by increasing the synaptic accumulation of serotonin and norepinephrine. They include SSRIs and SNRIs, which block the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, respectively. It can take as long as 6 to 8 weeks to have a full effect. Anxiolytics are a class of substances that are used to combat anxiety. They belong to the general category of depressants, which are drugs that depress or reduce nervous system activity. A barbiturate is a powerful, sedative anxiolytic derived from barbituric acid with dangerous addiction and overdose potential. Benzodiazepine agonists are a class of anti-anxiety drugs that bind to sites on GABA A receptors and reduce the excitability of neurons. An orphan receptor is any receptor for which no endogenous ligand has yet been discovered. An example is the benzodiazepine binding site. Allopregnanolone is a naturally occurring steroid that modulates GABA receptor activity in much the same way that benzodiazepine anxiolytics do. Neurosteroids are steroids produced in the brain. Opium is a heterogeneous extract of the seed pod juice of the opium poppy. Morphine is an opiate compound derived from the poppy flower. Analgesic refers to pain-killing properties. Heroin is an artificially modified, very potent form of morphine. It is highly addictive. Opioid receptors are found in the limbic and hypothalamic areas of the brain and are rich in the locus coeruleus and the periaqueductal gray, the neuronal body-rich region of the midbrain surrounding the cerebral aqueducts that connects the third and fourth ventricles involved in pain perception. There are 3 kinds of endogenous opioids: enkephalins, endorphins, and dynorphins. The main kinds of opioid receptors, delta, kappa, and mu, are metabotropic receptors. Marijuana is a dried preparation of the cannabis sativa plant, typically smoked to obtain THC. An endocannabinoid is an endogenous ligand of cannabinoid receptors, thus an analog of marijuana that is produced by the brain. It can function as retrograde messengers. Anandamide is an endogenous substance that binds the cannabinoid receptor molecule. Stimulants have an alerting, activating effect. Some act directly by increasing excitatory synaptic potentials, and others block normal inhibitory processes. Cat is an African shrub that, when chewed, acts as an amphetamine-like stimulant. Stimulants have a calming effect when working against ADHD. Nicotine is a compound found in plants, including tobacco, that acts as an agonist on a large class of cholinergic receptors. It binds to nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Cocaine is a drug of abuse derived from the coca plant that acts by potentiating catecholamine stimulation. Dual dependence is dependence for emergent drug effects that occur only when two drugs are taken simultaneously. An amphetamine is a molecule that resembles the structure of the catecholamine transmitters and enhances their activity. Prolonged use of amphetamine can lead to symptoms that resemble paranoid schizophrenia, such as agitated behavior, irrational suspiciousness, etc. Alcohol activates the GABA-A receptor coupled chloride channel, thereby increasing postsynaptic inhibition. Fetal alcohol syndrome, a disorder including intellectual disability and characteristic facial anomalies that affects children exposed to too much alcohol through maternal ingestion during fetal development. Frontal lobes, especially the superior frontal association cortex, are most affected by chronic alcohol use.